We have been endeavoring to go through the book of Daniel, and we are on the final part of the book, the end part of Daniel 11 and the Daniel chapter 12. And, you know, it has been many years that I've been trying to reconcile the different elements of this part of the book of Daniel. And I have to tell you this afternoon that I still can't put it together. All right, that's okay also because, you know, as I was trying to say this morning, the destination is a journey. You know, I feel like, you know, there's something that is said about the book of Daniel. I'm going to look at the verse in just a moment, but you know the verse. It says Daniel was to shut up the book and seal the words until the time of the end. I believe we are living pretty close to this time of the end, but maybe we're not exactly at that point, because I will tell you this. Our wisdom and our intellect and our searching won't open the book before the time. It won't unseal the prophecies before God's time. All right. I think the fact that we have willing hearts and open minds, that's all God wants. And at a certain point in time, things come together. This is the way I have always found him to work, and I believe that, you know, this is the way he will continue to work. And so I'm contented. But what I'm going to try to do this evening is to share with us the different elements that make this difficult. In other words, I'm going to show you this perspective, then that perspective, then the other perspective. And it will help us to understand the book better. Even if we don't have the exact questions we would like to have answered, but it will help us to understand the book and understand the issues. You know, sometimes you get a view of the landscape. You see the jigsaw puzzle. You put most of the pieces in place, but you can't just figure out where does this piece go. And then suddenly one day something happens and everything falls in place, and you just click it right at the exact spot. The entire picture becomes clear. I believe that's how prophecy is. So what I can do is give us a view of the rest of the landscape. You know, I've put up the studies we had last week and the week before, and people have been commenting, and some people seem a little irritated among those who have been commenting. They say, this is not what Uriah Smith was saying, and somebody else said, you need to go back and study what this person said, or you are a little inconsistent here. I agree with all of them, okay, because because I don't have a perfect understanding, and they don't have a perfect understanding. I agree. My main effort right now in this part of the prophecies, I'm going to tell everybody straight, I don't have a definite understanding of what is being said here. And anybody does, well, very good for you. I'm pretty sure that anybody who produces a point of view, I'm going to be able to find reasons why your point of view has holes in it. And I'm saying this because I've examined all the different perspectives, and I still haven't seen any of them that fits all the specifications. But I know it will come together. So that's the way God has always worked. But I'm just saying this at the beginning so that we have the right expectations as we go into this study. And I appreciate all of you being patient and bearing with me. But as I said, if there's anything that we discuss or I try to share that is not clear, or that you have a meaningful alternative understanding, I'll be very happy to hear it. I'll be very happy that we should share it with the group. All right. Meaningful alternative interpretation. All right. Let me emphasize that, because I know when we get into the study of prophecy, sometimes we have some random ideas that really, they just are impossible to fit. You know, so let's not waste time with stuff like that. But if there's something that really, it's a feasible understanding. Please share it. I'll be happy for that. So anyway, let me go to my screen and do a little bit of a quick revision on what we looked at last week. And this is not actually the image that I want, but let me go up a little bit. This is what we basically looked at last week. We saw that, and I don't even like this. Let me go to the next one. This is probably a better way of, we saw that at the time of the end, these are end time events. At the time of the end, there's a list here, and I'll just go through the list. We saw that at the time of the end, the king of the south will push out the king of the north. That's the first sentence there. Then the king of the north will counterattack like a whirlwind. He will enter into countries, he will enter the glorious land. Edom, Moab, and Ammon, which are neighbors of Israel, will escape out of his hand. But Egypt does not escape. Also, the Libyans and the Ethiopians follow submissively behind this northern king. Then he sets up his royal tent in the glorious holy mountain. But tidings from the north and the east will trouble this northern king, and so he will go forth to destroy. Now, I have another thing right below that is not in Daniel 11, but when you look at Daniel 12, I believe it fits right there. It says the power of the holy people will be scattered. When the king of the north goes forth to destroy, then he scatters the power of the holy people. And at this point, he is destroyed with no one to help him. And based on what I see, how we are following the trend of events, I see that this will be the end of the 3.5 times and a half. And we're going to look at that this evening. Why do I come to this conclusion? And this will be the end of these wonders. At that point, when the northern king is destroyed with nobody to help him, we have come to the end of the times and a half. This is the end of these wonders. At that time, Michael stands up, and there is the greatest time of trouble that the planet has ever seen. And at that time, God's people will be delivered. And there is a special resurrection where some of them are resurrected to damnation and some are resurrected to eternal life. Now, this is the sequence that we right up to the green strip, the first green strip as you come down to near the bottom, that first green strip where it says another king is destroyed with no help. This takes us to the end of Daniel chapter 11, and then the rest of it basically is from chapter 12. But these two chapters are one chapter, one sequence, right? It's divided into chapters by the translators, but it's one sequence of events. And what I want us to look at is that it says, at the time of the end, this will happen. Now, let me go back a little and look at this phrase, the time of the end. I have some references on the left. And this is what it says in the book of Daniel. If you go to Daniel chapter 8, where it talks about the exceedingly great horn, it says specifically, at the time of the end shall be the vision. In Daniel 11, in verse 35, it says, God's people will be persecuted till the time of the end. And the end will be at the appointed time. It says the same thing in Daniel 8 and verse 19. The end will be at the appointed time. So the question in my mind, are all of these talking about the same end of time? Let me tell you the two dilemmas that I see. There are two dilemmas, all right? The first of them is this. When you come down to Daniel 11 and Daniel 12, let me go back to that screen. And it talks about this end of time and these time periods. It shall at the time of the end, and it will be after 3.5 times. The first dilemma, are we talking about historical time or literal time? Is Is it 1260 years or is it 1260 days? Bear the question in mind, because as we go to the Bible itself, I'll show you why this is such a difficult question and why it is an important question. That's the first thing. Are we talking about historical events or are we talking about literal events at the end of time? This is a very important question. And we could also say, are there two different fulfillments of the same prophecy? Was it fulfilled in history? And will it be fulfilled again in literal time? Those are some options that we could think about. The other thing we want to look at, the other difficulty is this question. We touched on it last week. The other difficulty is this question. Are we talking about symbolic prophecy or is it literal? And you know what I mean, because as we have been going through Daniel 11, it has been talking about literal places, literal people, literal things, literal times and events. It seems that way. Then you come down to the end and it says, the king of the north will return at a certain point, but it shall not be as at the former time or the latter time. Something changes. And somebody made a suggestion, which makes sense to me, that after you pass in history, after you pass the time of Jesus, certain things change. And if certain things change, everything should change. What changes is that God's people are no longer Jews. God's people are now Christians after the time of Jesus. When the Bible says, at that time your people shall be delivered. Are we talking about Jews or Christians? Well, everybody will say that of course we're talking about Christians. We're not talking about Jews. Jews are not. Let me switch to my Bible so we can actually all right. Let me actually go to the verses in Daniel 12. All right. It says, at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince, which standeth for the children of thy people. Who are the children of thy people? You see, the language is ambiguous, but deliberately made this way by God because it's not supposed to be easy to understand. The great prince which standeth for the children of thy people. Are we talking about Jews or Christians? Is Michael the prince of the Jews, or is Michael the prince of God's people who are Christians of all ages? But it says Michael is this great prince, and he will stand up. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. At that time, your people shall be delivered, everyone that shall be found written in the book. You have a choice as you read this. You can think like Jews. You can think like many of these people who believe in the pre-tribulation rapture, and you can think these are Jews. God has gone back to dealing with the Jews, and they have gone back to being God's special people. And so Daniel's people are the Jews. Those of us who understand the new covenant, we conclude that this is absolute nonsense. The Jews were representative of something that was to come, and that something was the people of God, the new covenant people of God who are born of the Spirit. They are the only people that are truly the people of God. If any man have not the Spirit of Christ, he's none of his. As many as are led by the Spirit of God, they are the sons of God. These are the true people of God. So we are talking about Christians. At that time, your people shall be delivered. All right, so if the people of God are now Christians, then shouldn't the identity of Jerusalem change? Is Jerusalem now speaking of physical Jerusalem? When it says the king of the north, if you go back to the previous chapter, look at what it says. In verse 41, it says, he shall enter also into the glorious land. If we are talking about God's people now no longer being literal Jews, if we are now looking at a new covenant explanation, should not also the glorious land be changed? Is not the glorious land now no longer a literal Palestine? Isn't it now a spiritual place? Like Paul says in Galatians 4, Jerusalem, which is above, is the mother of us all. That's one interpretation of the glorious land. Or we could think of the glorious land as a church of Christ. Would that be accurate? When he enters into the glorious land, would it be accurate to think of this as being the church of God, which is in a sense Jerusalem, the present Jerusalem? Would that make sense? Now, I am not saying it is so. I'm saying this is a challenge that we are faced with as we are looking at this. That would mean that when it says many shall be overthrown, but these escape, Edom, Moab, and Ammon. Okay, we would have to make that spiritual as well. We have to say we're not talking about physical Edom, physical Moab, physical Ammon, because everything changes because you're now using New Testament interpretation. And if we go down where it says, the land of Egypt shall not escape, we have to think of what is the spiritual meaning of Egypt. That would kind of make sense, because when it says, he shall have power over the treasures of gold, silver, the precious things of Egypt, modern day physical Egypt is not noted for having gold or silver or precious things. Egypt today is not really an outstandingly wealthy country. If this passage sees fit to mention gold and silver and precious things in connection with Egypt, then maybe we really are talking about symbolic Egypt and not literal Egypt. And the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps, or they will follow at his heels. The Libyans and the Ethiopians were relatives of Egypt. You see, like just up here where it says that that Edom and Moab and Ammon would escape out of the hand of the king of the north. These are relatives of Israel. Libyans and Ethiopians are kind of relatives of Egypt. They're all the same kind of people. They are dark-skinned people living in North Africa. Similar kind of people. So it's kind of lumping people together in groups, or lumping these names in groups. And it is saying that the king of the north won't be able to overthrow the relatives of Israel, but will be able to overthrow Egypt and her relatives. Please, nothing that I'm saying is to be set in stone. And you people who watch on YouTube, please understand, I'm sharing ideas. I'm not putting anything in stone. I'm just giving you an idea of some of the challenges. So when it says, tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him, we are thinking of symbolic east. What we think of, who was to the east of Israel, or what does east represent in a symbolic sense? We're not then looking for geographic east, nor geographic north. Something bothers the king of the north, and what we suggested last week was that north is often represented as the city of the great king, as the throne of God, and east is the place from which the seal of God comes. In Revelation 7, the angel comes from the east, having the seal of the living God. So is this what it is saying? That what is happening among God's people outrages the king of the north, and so he goes forth with great fury to destroy and utterly to make away many. Who are these that he would go forth to destroy? Well, it seems to me that this is speaking about he goes to destroy the people of God. And why do I come to this conclusion? Let me just show you quickly, because I might forget to mention it afterwards. But if you go, let's look in the right panel in Daniel 12. Look at what it says in verse 7. Look at what it says in verse 7. The last part of verse 7. When he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. So this is referring to the king of the north. When he has achieved his goal of scattering the power of the holy people, clearly these are Christians. So again, it seems very clear that we are talking about a spiritual interpretation. This is a challenge to some people. I'm going to look at the physical interpretation alternative also, but I'm showing you first of all why a spiritual application may seem to make sense. All right. When he scatters the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. Finish how? What is the finishing point? Here is the finishing point. Go back to Daniel 11, the last verse. He shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas, in the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. This is the end. Why do we say it is the end? Because the next thing that happens, it says, at that time Michael shall stand up, the great prince, and there shall be a time of trouble, and thy people shall be delivered. Surely there's no end point beyond that. So when the angel says, when he says, all these things shall be finished, this is clearly in the left panel, verse 45. It seems clear to me this is the end point. When he says all these things shall be finished, he says when he scatters the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. Compare that with Daniel, with chapter 11. It says he shall go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly to wipe out many. It seems to me very clear that this attack is against the holy people. And what is the result? He accomplishes to scatter the power of the holy people. That's what he does. And what happens next? He comes to his end, and none shall help him. And this is what the angel says next. All these things shall be finished. So these two statements, in my opinion, they correlate with each other. They are saying the same thing in slightly different words. So what I mean is, when you look at it as from the point of view of these symbols need to be interpreted in a spiritual way, you have good reason for doing this. Let me show you one other thing that I was thinking of while I was looking at this. Like I say, I keep saying, and I will always keep saying, there's nothing that I have set in stone, but there are ideas that are floating around in my mind. And if ideas float around in your mind, maybe the Lord will help you to put them together at some time. If you go to Revelation 11, I know somebody mentioned this last week, but let's go back to it again. Look at what it says in Revelation 11. When they shall have finished their testimony, speaking about the two witnesses, the beast that ascended out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them and shall overcome them and kill them. Now that seems similar to what it says here. He goes forth with great fury to destroy and to make away many. And it's similar to what it says in chapter 12, where it says that he shall accomplish to scatter the power of the holy people. It seems to be saying something similar. It's two different books, right? But we're trying to correlate the time frames. In Revelation 11, it says this beast will make war against the two witnesses and will kill them. Now, interestingly, in the same passage, it says, their dead bodies shall lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. I find this interesting because it mentions a little earlier on that this king of the north overthrows Egypt. Does a symbol mean the same thing in Daniel 11 as what we see in Revelation Revelation 11? It says he shall stretch forth his hand upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He will have power over the precious things of Egypt. So it mentions Egypt here, and it mentions Egypt in Revelation 11. So those questions are there. Yes, go ahead. Yeah, and then Brother Matt.
What is spiritual Egypt?
All right, I'm going to take a little time to explain it. So let me let Brother Matt go first.
Thank you. It would seem that in the book of Daniel that these things were fulfilled historically, but then when they're reiterated in Revelation, they're speaking of times at the end, spiritually, symbolically. Even though there's a definite parallel with the things that you're showing, I think there's a dual application to be applied here.
Okay, Brother Matt, that's definitely a perspective that is worth considering, because that might be something. I mean, there's just the need of finding a button to push to say, see, this is evidence that it is a dual application. There's just that little thing that we need to look for. But that's a very feasible thought that needs to be examined as well. Brother Ian is saying, what does Egypt represent? I know that when in the book of Revelation, if we look on the right panel where it talks about the dead bodies lying in the street of the city, which is called Sodom, Egypt, and where also our Lord was crucified, I have understood this to mean that there are three elements that we see here: Sodom, Egypt, and the place where the Lord was crucified. All of those represented cities which had no more hope. They represented a condition where the Spirit of God had departed and there was no longer any grace. Sodom was gone. Egypt, when Moses left Egypt, Egypt was gone. Where the Lord was crucified, when they crucified Jesus, it was the end. The angel of mercy had left all of these three places. So I've said that this refers to the close of probation, but I was looking at it a little bit more and I realized that these three mentioned here also, they seem to symbolize great spiritual conditions which exist in the world today. For example, Sodom. One of the marks of today's generation, today's world, is outrageous immorality. And not just immorality, Sodom-like immorality. For the first time in the history of the world, or maybe the second time, they say it happened before the flood. But there's no time in the history of the planet, unless it happened before the flood, when men were getting married to men and women to women. This is the most bare-faced generation. There's no record they ever did it anywhere else. They carried on, they had homosexual practice, but you never had men marrying men. This is the first generation since the days of Noah that any generation has ever been so defiant of God. So spirituality is called Sodom, but also Egypt. The thing about Egypt is that, some have suggested that Egypt represents denial of God. I suppose you could argue that way because Egypt stood up against the God of heaven, and no matter what God did, Pharaoh refused to relent because he said, "Who is the Lord God that I should obey his voice? I neither know the Lord, neither will I let Israel go." So Egypt has been used to be a symbol of present-day atheism, because the most bare-faced rejection of God today arises from atheism and the evolutionary theory, where people believe that our God is nature and science is the greatest explanation of how we came to be here. So you have Egypt, and then you have also where our Lord was crucified. Where was that? That was Jerusalem. What is Jerusalem? Jerusalem was the great apostate religious system. So you have these three elements at the end of time, which are going to be strong opponents of those who stand with God. You have the licentious, Sodom-minded society. You have the atheistic, God-rejecting aspect of society, and you have the false religious system, which claims to belong to God, but rejects God. I see these elements also being mentioned here because these are three of the great elements that will stand against God's people at the end of time. This is what I see. I think those of us who believe it's only going to be a religious battle with Roman Catholicism against Adventists, you are going to be extremely surprised. And I think if we think it's only going to be atheism or it's only going to be the Sodomite agenda, we also will be surprised. I think it's a coalition of Satanism that we have never seen, the like of which the world has never seen before, all coming together with the express intent of completely wiping out the knowledge of God out of this planet. God's people are going to have an idea of what it
Can I
means.
ask a question, David?
Yes, Nikki, of what it means to be utterly without any evidence of any protection or any help. We are going to see this. Go ahead, Nikki.
I was just thinking about even the three, is it frog-like in Revelation? I'm trying to find it.
Chapter 16.
Yeah, I was looking at chapter 16. Does that have anything to do with, again, those three powers that you just mentioned?
From the mouth of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. You might be very well onto something. I've never looked at it from this perspective, so I won't answer you hurriedly, but it seems to be something that we should pursue. So I will look at it, but I won't answer you now. But it's something that is worth looking at, I think.
Okay.
Okay, so this is the spiritual application. Brother Matt said something which I'm going to comment on. Brother Matt says these things have been fulfilled historically, and it seems like this is the application in Daniel. But when it comes to Revelation, there is a real-time repeat, and I would go with that, except see the reason why I have reservations about that, brother Matt. Go to Daniel 12. Look at Daniel 12 here. This is the problem I have. I mean, I'm very tempted to look at it that way. I want to look at it that way, but I have a problem with Daniel 12 because look at Daniel 12. Back to verse 7. All right. Look at what happens. Daniel says, I looked, and behold, there stood the other two, the one on this side of the bank of the river, the other on that side of the bank. So they are speaking to the man in the middle of the river, which we said is Michael, which we believe to be Jesus. And the question is asked, how long shall it be to the end of these wonders? There is a reason why he asks the question. There is no question that is asked by a heavenly being that is irrelevant. The angel, he's not asking for his benefit, he's asking for our benefit. God instructs him to ask this question because he wants us to hear the answer. And he wants us to hear the answer because the answer is significant. It's important to our understanding. So he asks the question. And what happens? It says, I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand unto heaven, and he sware by him that liveth for ever and ever, that it shall be for a time, times and a half. This historically has been the time that we say applies to the period of papal supremacy. We say this applies to the time when the Pope had his great power and there was this great persecution during the Dark Ages. And that really fits perfectly in some situations. But look at this situation. Remember, the question is, how long shall it be to the end of these wonders? So the critical element here is the end of these wonders. What end of which wonders? Whatever he's talking about, this is what it is. It will be for a time, times and a half a time.
Can I interrupt?
Yes, brother Mark, just 1 second. These wonders will come to an end after a time, times and a half a time. So whatever this time is, when it ends, these wonders will all be at an end. So we are left to ask, what are the wonders that he's talking about? Go ahead, brother Matt.
Well, it just reminds me of the verse in Revelation. All the world wondered after the beast. And John saw all these great wonders in heaven. It makes me put reference to Revelation and the spiritual application and the symbolic application. Maybe that's what the angel is talking about, the wonders of the end,
Okay,
not the historical.
I agree that the word is the same, but I'll tell you why. What we have to do is look at the passage in its context. I mean, the word is the same, but you have to ask, first of all, what is the context of the passage? That's the first and most important question. Now, let me go back to Revelation 11, Daniel 11, because this is the context, okay? You read through the entire chapter, Daniel 11, and you ask yourself, what wonders do we see in Daniel 11? Because you can't take the statement out of context, okay? The angel is actually, let me unlink this again. Yeah, the angel is actually asking the question, how long shall it be to the end of these wonders? Now, when he says these wonders, he's referring to something that Daniel has seen. The book of Daniel was the book of Revelation was written 600, 700 years later. It didn't exist yet. So Daniel didn't see any of the wonders that are mentioned in the book of Revelation. These wonders, remember the word is these. So he's referring to what Daniel has seen. What has Daniel seen? Daniel has seen the king of the north passing through and attacking everybody and overthrowing kingdoms. And then he sets the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Then he comes to his end with nobody to help him. This is the end. What exists after this? The only thing that happens after this is the great time of trouble and the return of Christ. So logically, we ask, what is the end of these wonders that he's talking about? To me, the most reasonable thing that we can conclude when you look at the context, he's talking about when the king of the north comes to his end and nobody to help him. That's the end point. After that, the assaults of the king of the north are over. The persecution of God people are over. The power of the holy people has been scattered. So the real question is, when will the king of the north come to his end? And he lifts up his hand to heaven and he swears by God that it shall be for 3.5 times. The angel swears by God that at the end of 3.5 times, the king of the north will come to his end with nobody to help him. And he goes on to further reinforce it because he says, when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. That is the end. Now, I realize that there is a great deal of evidence that seems to say we are talking about history, all right? Because historically, Adventists have interpreted this to mean that the 3.5 times ended in 1798. The problem is you have to link the 3.5 times to the scattering of the power of the holy people and the finishing of all these things. You have to ask the question, did all these things finish in 1798? Was the power of the holy people scattered in 1798? Because if that happened, it's done. We're on the way home.
Maybe the holy people are just as a reference to the church. And even though they were apostate, maybe it's the priests and the people who were supposed to represent God were scattered. Historically.
Well, the thing is, even then, who scattered the power of the church in 1798? You have to look at the point in
Atheists.
time.
And David,
Yes, Nikki.
if I'm just looking at it because if chapter 12 follows immediately after verse 45 in chapter 11, then it would mean if historically that would be 17, was it 1798 you said? If that was the case, then verse 1 of chapter 12, and at that time Michael stand up, that would be a historical event as well, wouldn't it?
It would have to be. It would have to be something in the past because it happens immediately when the king of the north comes to his end. At that time, Michael stands up. If Michael has not yet stood up, then the king of the north has not yet come to his end. And if he has not yet come to his end, then all of these things are not finished. And if all of these things are not finished, the power of the holy people has not yet been scattered. If you see what I'm saying, it's a sequence of events that happen one behind the other. So while I as I said, I'm by no means being dogmatic. I'm looking at this and seeing that there are issues and there are problems that negate one interpretation, then they negate another interpretation. And I don't want to sit down on one thing and start to believe it just because I need something to believe. I would like to know that whatever conclusion we come to, it fits. It fits seamlessly because that is the way God is. That's the way the word of God and the work of God is. It fits together in a way that it fits like a hand in a glove, and we don't have to force anything. I mean, to me, it is significant that the question is asked, how long to the end of these wonders? God wants us to pay attention. That's why he asked the question. Whenever God wants to get our attention in either Daniel or Revelation, he asks a question because you are compelled to pay attention when a question is asked. And the answer he gives, it involves the end of these wonders. Okay? I don't believe these wonders have been ended. By no means. We all of us, I think, believe that the greatest events in the history of the Christian church are ahead of us. All of us believe that the greatest uprising of the enemies of God are still ahead of us. All of us believe that the king of the north, or the antichrist, or the man of sin, or the beast from the bottomless pit, all of us believe that whichever one of these, or even if there are several of them, their greatest work is just ahead of us. We don't believe these things are in the past, so it's kind of really difficult for us to say that we have already come to the end of these wonders. In 1798, the power of the holy people was scattered. I mean, I can understand. Early Adventists, they believed that probation was over. They believed that there was no more preaching because they thought that the time of that was past. I think even Ellen White says something to that effect. I mean, one of the criticisms that people have of early Adventists is that they taught something called the shut door, where they believed that probation was closed. Some of what they taught might have been related to that idea, but because they might have believed that the power of the holy people was scattered. But you and I can't sit where we are today and believe that the power of the holy people has been scattered. You could listen to Sister Anita this morning after the meeting when she was concerned about the fact that we don't see the kind of power among God's people. But why is she concerned? Because she recognizes, like all of us, that God's people still have the greatest manifestation of power still ahead of us. Our power has not yet been scattered. But when our power is scattered, or when we have no more power or ability, when probation is closed, all these things shall be finished. So this is a dilemma we see when we look at it from this perspective. Now, let me, to be fair, share the other perspective. And to be perfectly honest with you, I have not gone back to revise Uriah Smith carefully, so I don't want to misrepresent Uriah Smith. All right, so I'm not going to go too deeply into the physical part of it. But here is the point. Here are the arguments in favor of a literal interpretation, and then I look for the argument in favor of a historical interpretation. But literal interpretation, all right, why would we say it's not symbolic? Well, here's the first reason. Everything in the prophecy so far, king of the north, king of the south, Julius Caesar, Augustus Caesar, Tiberius Caesar, all of these have been talking about literal events. So the argument is, when you come down to verse 40, it is inconsistent to switch from literal to spiritual or symbolic. That's the argument. But I think I already mentioned the reason why we could be justified in making that switch, because we say it is very clear that the people of God are no longer referring to the Jews. And if this is true, then shouldn't we be justified in adjusting everything else? That's the argument. So there is an argument against the idea that it should be literal right through. But anyway, that's how some people argue. And Justin, you wanted to say something? I think your mic is on. Okay. So if this is true, then if we are talking about literal, then what we are looking at as we go down in Daniel 11, we are looking for an attack on literal Egypt. We are looking for an attack against where are we? I'm in chapter 12 here. Look in the right panel. Here are some of the things we are looking for. As a matter of fact, maybe I could just bring up my illustration, because that will kind of make me. All right. So if you look at from the pink coming down, when it says he enters into the country, whoever the king of the north is, he's going to literally invade other countries. He's going to literally invade Israel. But he's not going to invade Edom, Moab, and Ammon, those countries to the right of Israel, as you look at the map. Those countries to the right. Edom, Moab, and Ammon, they don't exist anymore, but you have equivalent countries. What it means is that this king of the north doesn't actually invade that part. But then he invades Egypt, and he invades Libya, and he invades Ethiopia, or he brings them into submissiveness. Secondly, it means that he's going to set up his headquarters in Jerusalem, which is referred to as the glorious holy mountain. The next thing is that he's going to receive some news from the north, which is Russia, China, that part of the world, and from the east, which is like similarly China, maybe from the east, and Russia to the north, and then you have some Islamic countries like Iran and Iraq to the east. These countries are going to bother the king of the north, and so he will go forth to destroy. Destroy who? Well, he apparently, what he hears, the news he hears, makes him attack God's people, which doesn't make logical sense. Because if Russia and China are bothering you, why are you going to attack Christians? If it's a physical war we are talking about, then go and attack physical nations. But instead, the king of the north, clearly the king of the north, is the king who attacks God's people. Because it says in chapter 12, when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people. So the attack, when it says he goes forth to destroy and to make away many, this is the persecution of God's people. So I really find a physical interpretation, as I'm looking at it and discussing it here, I find that there are challenges to looking at it literally. All right, I know I've waffled back and forth on this, but it's because I'm starting my way through like everybody else. But at least I understand the issues well enough to be able to share the different perspectives. Now, so this northern king, if we are looking at it literally, this northern king, a political power, he scatters the power of God's people, and that's not exactly how we expect it. We expect the northern king, whoever it is, to have some grief against God's people, not against Russia and China, but against God's people. Therefore, he goes to destroy God's people, and he scatters their power, and then he's destroyed with nobody to help him. So some people, I mean, is a northern king, the Pope is a northern king, the EU, whoever the northern king is, he sets up his palace in the Holy Land. Is this literal Israel, or does it mean that the northern king establishes his headquarters in the Christian church? Where is the glorious holy mountain? If you say spiritually, then it's the Christian church. I mean, those Adventists who look at it this way, they say it's the Adventist church. But I think I think I would never agree with that anymore. I'm not so limited in my thinking anymore. I think the Christian church is God's place. But this king of the north establishes his rulership in the Christian church, and then he's destroyed with nobody to help him.
Can I share a point here, David?
Go ahead, Nikki.
I might be way off the limb, but I was just thinking and looking back on Revelation, I believe it's Revelation 18, where is a woman is destroyed without any help. And I'm just wondering if there's any link with it at all with Daniel 11 verse 45, where the king of the north is destroyed or come to its end with none to help. I might be way out there, but I was just looking and see if there's any connection.
All of those connections are worth looking at, because there are elements and there are things that seem to fit. For example, if this king of the north is the papacy, if the king of the north is the papacy, then the woman in Revelation is the Catholic Church. So there's that correlation. The Catholic Church is destroyed right down at the time of the end, with nobody to help. So it would correlate with this, where it says the king of the north is destroyed with nobody to help him. Furthermore, we expect Catholicism to make an assault upon true Christians at the end of time, and with the assistance of Egypt and Sodom. And we expect Catholicism to ride the beast and have great success right down to the very time of the end, until it comes to its end. So those prophecies really seem to, like, they would fit together very well, But again, it's an idea that I will say I support examining. Now let me go back to the Bible and look at just the last part of Daniel 12 here. I would like to okay, this thing here is giving me a little bit of stress. Oh boy, I didn't mean to close that screen. Anyway, all right. Okay, so the angel says, Michael says, it shall be for a time, times and a half. So he talks about a 3.5-year period. And when he has scattered the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. And what it suggests to me is that from a certain point in time, until the king of the north comes to his end, there will be 3.5 times. All right, so like Daniel, I am curious. And Daniel says, oh my Lord, not when now. What shall be the end of these things? Not when, but what? I think he's really saying, what event shall I look for to mark the end of these things? Now, I have already said that I believe it is when he comes to his end and none shall help him. That's what I have concluded. But I also take note that Michael does not say this to Daniel. What he basically says to Daniel is, Daniel, be at peace and calm your mind. This is not for you. Because he said, go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. So again, you see this reference to the time of the end. All right, what he's saying is that when the time of the end comes, when the time comes that the king of the south is going to push at the king of the north, then you will understand what I'm saying. So remember it says, at the time of the end, let's go back and look at it in verse 40, over in the right panel. At the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him. So this happens at the time of the end. And what the angel says to Daniel is that, what Michael says is that the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. So round about the same time that the king of the south will irritate or attack the king of the north, round about the same time, these words of Daniel will be opened up. All right? So the point is, Adventists say, and I'm going to keep referring to Adventists say because I know a lot of us have that kind of background. They say that this happened in 1798 at the time of the end, and that is why they see it as a conflict that took place between France and Turkey, because there was some kind of warfare between France and Turkey, and we could accept this because there was a literal battle, but then it makes one of them the king of the north and one of them the king of the south, and it eliminates the rest of Europe. It eliminates who control the world, but at the same time, it doesn't explain where it says that he goes forth with great fury to destroy. He plants the tabernacles of his palace. He comes to his end, and none shall help him. Right? If you say this, you have to continue to maintain that France or Turkey. Don't quote me, because people keep saying I'm mixing it up. I do, and I accept that I'm mixing it up. But one of them is supposed to go and plant his headquarters down in Jerusalem, if you accept it literally like that. Anyway, I'm not going there. I'm just making sure I'm covering the different ideas. So he
David,
says, yes, brother Ayayi.
yeah, when we are talking about Egypt, right, the king of the south, and you said last time that is Egypt, right? At a certain point of time, it was Egypt, but then Egypt was no more. And we know the characteristic of Egypt when we were studying Revelation, right? That is atheism, atheistic powers. So would then couldn't we say rightly that if at the time of the end the king of the south would push at him or at her is going to be atheism against the papacy?
To be honest, brother Ayayi, at this point, I am willing to say yes, there's merit in that perspective. I mean, at one point I was very strongly teaching that was the interpretation. Then I kind of backed away a little, and I've waffled a bit since, and that's why I say this evening that I don't have any sealed interpretation that I can say this is it. But what you just said, I accept that it makes a lot of sense. I accept this. And to be honest, when it comes to this passage, it's very difficult to study it in an open forum because there are so many ideas. Somebody just has to closet himself away with the Lord and look at everything. And this is what I've been meaning to do and what I want to do, and but even then I will acknowledge, like everybody else, that until the Lord decides it is time to open your understanding, you can't understand it. I acknowledge that, but what you just said, I find a lot of merit in it. Okay. So he said the words were to be shut up and sealed till the time of the end. And here's what he says next. Many shall be purified and made white and tried. Brother David, I think your mic is open. I don't know if you want to say something. It says, many shall be purified and made white and tried. But the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. Now let me read the other few verses, and then I'm going to try to bring up a screen where I can write, so I can make some scribblings in relation to what we're about to look at. He says, from the time that the daily shall be taken away, let me eliminate the word sacrifice, okay? From the time that the daily shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. What is he responding to? He's still responding to the question, how long shall it be to the end of these wonders? That's what he's still responding to. He said it would be for 3.5 times. But he's still on that theme, and he goes on to say now, from the time that the daily shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. So it's not 1260, it's 1260 plus 30. Blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,335 days. Confusion upon confusion. But go thou thy way till the end be, for thou shalt rest and stand in thy lot at the end of the days. All right, so Daniel, don't worry yourself. This is not for you. You're going to sleep, and at the end of time, whatever, you'll stand with God's people. But the point is, we are given 3 time periods, and again, what I'm going to do is give you. I'm going to try to bring up a chart here that I would like to scribble on to kind of give you an idea of how these time periods might fit together. I say might because I'm not presumptuous enough to believe that I am suddenly going to be able to explain the thing. Let me see if I can bring up my screen. I probably have to close that one to bring up this one. All right, let me see. Wow, it worked. All right, I'm on another device. That's why I didn't know if it would work. All right, so praise the Lord. All right, so the first thing is that he says there are 1260 days. Then he says there are 1290 days. Then he says there are 1335 days. And what are we looking at? What is the question? It is the end of the wonders, right? So when do these wonders come to an end? He says the wonders come to an end at the end of the 1260 days, right? That is when it comes to an end. But he says from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away and the abomination of desolation is set up, it's going to be 1290 days. So the 1290 days also will end at the same time as the 1260 days. Can you see that? They both end at the same time. But there are 30 days extra on the 1290. So in order to get to the 1290, we have to go past the beginning of the 1260. The 1290 begins before the 1260. All right. So where do we begin the 1290 days? He says it is from the time that the daily is taken away. Let me see. How can I? No, I don't want to do that. Sorry. What is this? What is this giving me? Give me just a second. This thing is giving me a little bit of stress here. It's not responding. It wants to stop my, okay, good. All right, so we begin with the abomination setup. The abomination of desolation is set up. From that time, you have 1290 days and you come to the end. 1260 days, you come to the end. So if this is a 12, let me use another color. Sorry guys, I didn't plan this chart. If this is the 1260 days, from here to here, this is the 1290 days from here to here, then it goes on for another 30 days, right? So this period here is longer than the 1260 days, right? Let me give it another color so we don't get confused. This period here, this 30 days, is an addition to the 1260 days. And those 30 days take you to when the abomination is set up. Then he says, blessed is he that cometh to the 1335 days. 1290 plus 1335. Let me see if I can do this a little differently, so it makes a little more sense. 1290, and then you have 1335. So what we have here now is both of them start at this point with the abomination of desolation set up. When you get here, it's the end, right? All of them are at the end. That's the end of the wonders. Then you have to go on now for another 45 days. You have to go on for another 45 days. And when you come to the end of the 45 days, what does he say? He says, blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the end of the 1335. Now let me see if everybody understands what I'm trying to say. Can I use another? Let me use another color. Or let me use a highlighter. All right. So we have a starting point here. What does this represent? This represents from the time that the abomination of desolation is set up to the beginning of the 1260 days. Then after
Can I
12,
ask a question? David, sorry.
yes,
Can I ask a question? Is it the same abomination that make it desolate in Daniel 9? Or is it a different abomination we're talking about here?
it's different, absolutely. Very clearly, it's different, and I'm going to explain it why in just a moment. But
Okay.
after you come to the end of the 1260 now, you have another 45 days until you come to the blessing, right? So it's very confusing, I know, but let me see if I can put it all together. This period in the middle here is 1260 days. This period at the beginning here is 30 days. This period at the end here is 45 days. All right. So the period at the beginning, it starts from when the abomination is set up, right? The abomination is set up at this point. You count 30 days. Then is the beginning of the 1260 days. And I think this beginning of the 1260 days is the beginning of the persecutions by the king of the north. And he goes on for 1260 days. Then he comes to his end. He comes to his end right at this point. Then it says there's another 45 days, and the one who survives to this 45 days is blessed. Now, that's basically the picture. And Adventists say that all of this was fulfilled in history. They say the 1260 days, of course, started in 538 AD, when the papacy came to power, and it ended in 1798. But they say you have to go back 30 years before that, and to find out when the abomination was set up. And I don't even recall what they say was the setting up of the abomination of desolation. Does anybody here remember? What do they say was the setting up of the abomination of desolation? I don't remember, but something that happened in 508. 508. Something like the establishing of paganism or something like that. Anyway, it's some event that is obscure in history that I really feel like it's a manipulating of the facts to make something fit. That's what I felt like when I read it the first time, and I still feel that way. All right. So all right. Anyway, so they believe that something happened in 508, yes, and then 30 years later the papacy came into power, and then in 1798. In fact, let me put some dates there. 508, and then 5.
The downfall of paganism.
Say that
Well,
again.
if you had 508,
Downfall of paganism.
All right. Thank you, Shar. I think you're right. So they say that paganism, but oh yes, you're right, because they believe that paganism was the daily. So they believe that the daily or paganism was taken away, or it fell in 508, and then 30 years later, the papacy gained power in 538, and then 1260 years later, in 1798, the papacy was overthrown. And then it says there's a blessing on those who continued another 45 years. What happened 45 years later? Anybody can guess?
It was 1843.
1843. And what happened in 1843? It was the beginning of
Jesus was supposed to
Adventism.
have come back.
It was a great disappointment. It was the beginning of Adventism. So the special blessing in the book of Daniel is for those who live to see the Adventist church.
No.
If you say
It
no,
was supposed to be. It was supposed to be when Jesus was supposed to come back.
right, but he never did. So where's the blessing? I mean, I'm just saying how
David.
Adventists interpret it. They say that
Oh, I
this
see.
is what happened they came to the understanding of this and all the rest of it. And this was a great blessing. And if you say no, you have my sympathies because I feel the same way. Somebody
Can
said
I
something.
say something?
Sure, David, go ahead.
This is David. Certainly the blessing of that verse, that 13:35, in my opinion, this is just my own opinion. If you look at the last feast, the only time there's a number 5 is on the 15th day of the 7th month, which is the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles, which goes for 7 days and then an 8th day. So I have always thought that Jesus would come back several days after the atonement or Day of Atonement, maybe 5 days later, which would be the time frame that this is talking about. Not necessarily, and once you understand that understanding, which is going to be a literal time, that's how I've taken it. So however the numbers fall, that feast will be fulfilled based on time.
Okay. And I with everything else as I'm saying, David, that's an idea worth taking and looking at, right? Because this evening we're just sharing ideas. But I'm going to look now at, let us look at this as literal time instead of historical time. The Adventists interpreted it as historical time. And I would say that it certainly was exciting and thrilling if you lived in 1844 and you looked at these things and you interpreted them this way. It's 200 years later, and a lot of what they looked at and believed, we have had to revise. And this is one of the things that I'm saying, maybe there was a historical application, but it seems clear that there's an end time application because it says, all these things shall be finished. The end of these wonders, we certainly have not seen all these things finished. We certainly have not seen the power of the holy people scattered. So let's look at it another way. The abomination setup, what would that represent? In my opinion, this would represent the establishment of the mark of the beast. Maybe I'm wrong, or something of that nature. Something is to be established. And if you look at the video I did entitled The Abomination of Desolation, you might get some more ideas as to what it might be. But anyway, let's leave these dates. Let's take these dates out here because this is the historical situation. We don't have any dates. We only have time periods. So if we take it as literal time, then something happens, something is established that is called the abomination. I believe it is something set up in the Christian church. 30 days later begins the great persecution by the king of the north, by the man of sin, or whoever is going to do that persecution. I won't argue about that because we have different ideas as well. But this persecution lasts for 3.5 years. At the end of that time, this king of the north comes to his end with nobody to help him. Are we at the end of time? We're almost there, but there's a little time left. And if you take this as a literal prophecy, you would have 45 days left until something that is referred to as the blessing. Blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1335 days, 45 more days after the king of the north is destroyed. 45 days are left. That's 1 month and 15 days. So, I mean, I know that for many people, this is like you're setting time. No, nobody knows when this starts. But when it starts, you might have an idea how it will progress. Because the Bible already gives us time periods. Those time periods are not just for entertainment or for to give us something to entertain our brains. They are to help us to understand things that happen within a certain time frame. Obviously, it's a part of God's plan to feed his people and prepare them for what is coming. So when the king of the north comes to his end with none to help him at the end of 1260 days, when all these things are ended, all these things are finished, there is still 45 more days. And Michael says the one who comes to that 45 days is blessed. David just suggested that maybe it's a Feast of Tabernacles, which represents the harvest of the earth. I don't know if there's anything that could be more blessed than this in the future.
David,
Yes, we.
Could it be then that's why Christ says, I will come quickly?
It could be.
Because that time is so short, you can see why he says, yeah, I will come quickly.
It certainly will have a great deal more impact if we look at it that time in that context, you know. But this is these are the approaches to this prophecy as I understand it. And of course, there's also the point of view of it referring to Islam and Catholicism, which is kind of like a hybrid between both things, but between both interpretations. But what I'm saying is you either have to look at it as historical or literal, and you have to look at it as either physical or spiritual. Those are the two approaches, or four approaches if you want. Two approaches with two different perspectives relating to each. So I'm not saying which which is right or which is wrong. I'm just saying here are the approaches and here are the reasons why you might look at it this way or that way. Which is correct? Everybody has an opinion until Jesus makes it very clear. And I hope we all can find that this is a good enough place for us to bring the study to an end this evening, because as far as I'm concerned, I think I've just about said all that I can say about it. You know, so I
Can
will
I
have to
add
leave.
something?
You may, Sister Nikki, by all means.
Chapter 3. I'm just looking in Revelation. I think there's a 3.5 time period in Revelation as well. Imagine try to find it.
There's several of them. It's in Revelation 11, and it's all
11.
yes.
Is it the same? Does it fit in with a historical or a futuristic, or is it something totally different than what
I,
Daniel is talking about here?
I believe the 3.5, the times and a half in Revelation 11 is the same as in Daniel chapter 12.
Right. So and that is in context with a future understanding.
Based on how I'm looking at it, absolutely. I think it's future. We can't say that there was never a historical fulfillment. Some of the historical fulfillments that the Adventist pioneers looked at, they seem to be very striking. But so I am willing to say there is more than one application. And as far as the abomination of desolation is concerned, it is very clear. It is very clear. There are at least three fulfillments of the abomination of desolation. The first one was the destruction of Jerusalem. The second one had to do with the papal during the age of the papacy in the Dark Age, and the third one is right now at the end of time. So all three of these are represented in the book of Daniel. So that this alone shows that some of these prophecies are intended to have more than one fulfillment. One fulfillment in historical time where you have a partial application, like Joel chapter 2, when Peter said, this is a prophecy that is fulfilled today. And it's very clear it has another application at the end of time, because associated with a prophecy is a statement: the sun shall be turned to darkness, the moon shall be turned to blood in that great and terrible day of the Lord, which never happened in apostolic times. So this is one of the things we need to look at, more than one application, you know.
David.
Yes, Brother Ian.
But in chapter 12 of Revelation, there's also a 1260 time period and
Right.
3.5. So that one is historic, isn't it?
There are some of them that you can't avoid the reality that it seems to fit very closely with a historical application, and that is one of them, right? When the woman was into the wilderness. So this is a problem with the time periods, because somebody is going to say you can't just jump from historic to literal. You need to have a principle that you're working off. You need to have some key for defining what is historical and what is literal, and that is one of the challenges that I personally have. Because while I can see that the context clearly says this is literal or this is not literal, I know that I need, and we all need, some key that I can say every time you see this particular pattern, it's historic or it's literal. So we're looking for this because there's so much about the prophecies that we still don't perfectly understand. But I think we're making progress.
David.
Yes, is it Brother
Is there
Gerald?
a difference? Is there a difference in the
Yeah.
time when they use the word, for example, in Revelation, where it used 1260 days, and that, and as when compared to when it says 3.5 days?
I've looked at that and it doesn't seem to make a difference. It's 42 months, 1260 days, 3.5 times. It doesn't seem to be, that doesn't seem to be one of the keys. Brother Gerald, go ahead.
I might be.
You're
I'm
very
just
low.
trying to I'm just trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together. What I'm saying is, you mentioned before, you're talking about about the kings. You said, well, the king of the north, what kind of king he isn't seem to be a king. But I'm thinking that the king of the north he could be the king of Babylon, the Pope, because he, you know what I'm saying, Babylon,
Yes.
and that could be if you start putting a puzzle, because sometimes I put a puzzle together, sometimes you start at a crazy end of the puzzle, but I'm just saying that if he's a king, being a king, meaning the king of Babylon, and the persecution is actually going to come from, the false, not the real church, but the professed Christians. And that's where the major persecution is going to come from. There might be some time frame in that. I don't know, maybe I'm way off.
If we look at it, the spiritual application, I would say, I almost would definitely say the king of the north is either the papacy or it's the European Union, right? I would say this, but
Brother David.
I see your brother Raymond. I see you. So, but I would say, like with everything else, we need to look at it more closely. But it's a feasible idea, and I for myself, the discussion this evening is helpful to me because it's kind of showing me the pros and cons and enabling me to go and look at it more closely. And I'm just hoping that for all of us, it will have the same kind of effect because nothing we can say is absolutely so because there are so many parameters. But if we have a good idea of how to approach it, we can begin to do something that can bring some answers. Go ahead, Brother Ray.
Yeah, just a question. Okay. So a king, tell me if I'm correct. A king is like a president, someone that governs a nation, someone that has the leader number one, like the Queen is Elizabeth. Although they say she's something, but she's just there as something there as a figure. But kings represent of someone that governs very powerful nations. Now, how can the Pope be that king of the north if he does not govern a nation, an entire nation like a president?
Okay, I understand that. And the thing is, let me suggest an answer. Many times in the book of Daniel, a king does not represent an individual. It represents a kingdom, represents a nation. And it could be argued that the Vatican is a nation. It's a very tiny nation, but it's a nation. The other thing that we could look at is if you look at Daniel 7. Okay, one of the things that we probably can't escape is that the little horn in Daniel 7 represents the papacy. So the papacy is not the beast, but it is representative of the beast in that it speaks. It speaks and seems to speak on behalf of the beast. So what the Bible is showing us is that the papacy is a significant influence in the beast. So if you look at the king of the north as referring to the beast, for example, it wouldn't be strange if the papacy is a mouthpiece or is acting on behalf of that entity right up until the time of the end. Remember, the papacy is riding the beast, or the woman is riding the beast until she's destroyed, until the horns turn against her. And what we are looking at here is before this king is destroyed. So if we are talking about the papacy, it would fit because she is representative of the mindset of Europe until she's destroyed. She's riding the beast. So I could see that it would fit that way, brother Ray.
I have a question. I always wondered why the book of the book of Daniel seemed to end with the second coming of Christ, when the book of Revelation ends with the destruction of the wicked and destruction of Satan. And I've always kind of, in the back of my head, always thought that when he comes to an end, nobody helps him. It's actually when Satan comes to his end at the very end, and no one gets on his side because everything that he's done has been unmasked. And so the people themselves no longer support him. And, according to Zechariah 14, which is the day when Jerusalem comes down, which is part of what Revelation reveals. So I've always wondered, why is it that Daniel ends there and Revelation ends there? And is there something about that prophecy that may have a double application before the second coming and right after the judgment of the wicked, and Christ comes back and establishes his kingdom here on earth? So I don't know. I've always
Yeah.
had that in the back of my head.
Well, I'll just comment on that quickly because as we know, Revelation 11 and Revelation 12 has no chapter divisions as it was originally written. So it would read like this: Yet he shall come to his end, and no one shall help him. And at that time shall Michael stand up, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation. So what this would mean is that
Daniel.
Daniel. What this would mean is that immediately the king of the north comes to his end and nobody to help him, then there is this time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation. And at that time, God's people are delivered. I mean, you know that this cannot apply to after the 1,000 years. So if we apply to the 1,000 years, it's very selective application. Certainly, most of it would not apply. You know, that alone throws that out. But why then doesn't Daniel take you through the millennium? And I would respond by saying that compared to Revelation, Daniel is an outline. Daniel is an outline. It's a sketch. It's a brief representation. If you even look at Daniel chapter 2, look at how everything is represented. A stone is cut out that smites the image. The stone becomes a mountain and fills the whole earth. Vast amounts of history. Multiple events are completely eliminated in that prophecy. It's just a vague outline, you might even say. You get a bit more detail in chapter 7 and chapter 8. But the point is, in Daniel, God is giving us a kind of template. Revelation is far more detailed. So I would think that that is the reason. You know, a lot of what God gives us in Revelation is more relevant to us because we are New Testament Christians who understand the plan of salvation far more comprehensively than they did in the time of Daniel. So God gave them the prophecy in the context of their ability to comprehend or to grasp what was being said, even though they never understood the prophecy. But some concepts they just couldn't understand. Like for example, if you know in Isaiah, okay, when in Isaiah it talks about the new earth, look at what it says. It says, as the days of a tree shall be the days of my people. The child shall die 100 years old. What? There's going to be death in the new earth? And it says, they shall go out to look upon the carcasses of the men that sinned against me. God is telling them about the new earth, but he's giving them language and ideas that they can relate to, relating to how they understood things. So a lot of these things, God never went into detail because the Old Testament mind was not capable of understanding it. So I think that's one of the reasons why the New Testament, the book of Revelation, is so much more detailed and tells us so much more. Anyway, I'm going to close. I'm going to close the recording. I'm going to close the meeting. And you know, if we want to keep on talking, by all means. But let me stop.